So welcome to kind of the breakout session of Know Before You Go, a global guide to global expansion. I'm hoping that you're having a great day. I think a lot of you are in England or across the globe, wherever you might be. I happen to be in Salt Lake City, Utah, one of our shared service centers here. This is where I live, so I'm actually in my home office. So it's excited to be able to talk to you a little bit about global expansion and some of the trends that are going on. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Adam Sheffield. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Global Upside, and been in the kind of global HCM space for a long time. I used to work at a company called ADP for many years, managed kind of global teams for them. Here at Global Upside, what we do is we help with global expansion in 170 plus countries. We do a lot of unique offerings when it comes to that. We're not going to jump into all of our products and services. That's not even the point of this conversation, but just wanted to highlight, some of the things that we do to help companies globally. So we're going to talk about some of the trends today. So the business outlook is very, very strong for 2021. You can see here from the World Trade Organization that world GDP is expected to rise 5.1% in 2021. And, some of you have probably already seen a lot of this. This is happening in first quarter and now second quarter. And then they expect it to continue to rise to 3.8 in 2022. And this is, coincides with a retraction in 2020. So just massive expansion going around. Lots of things are being invested in. It really is kind of this unique point in history as we're kind of coming out of this pandemic. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're not past it yet, right? But we're starting to come out of it, and we're starting to see a lot of growth trends. So here's some of the trends regionally that just want to talk a little bit about. And I'm not going to go through every statistic here. I do love statistics, but I think it kind of brings this home because it's not just one country or one part of the world that it's expanding and growing. So if you look here, one of the statistics I love is in France. They saw 84,000 new businesses formations in that October 2020, the highest ever recorded, and 20% more than the same month in 2019. So you could see, McKinsey put this out there to show these are the trends that are happening that have started in 2020 that are really going to help with the growth in 2021 and beyond. So it's just a unique time. You look at in the US, right? We've seen US productivity has grown massively, 4.6 following a 10.6% in the second quarter of last year. So we've seen a lot of growth even in 2020, and 2021 has been just as big, and will continue to strive for sure. Even in Asia, right? We were a little worried about China's economy with COVID and all those type of things. Well, it's bounced right back. It's expanding, tremendously. Big expansion numbers, 7.9% expected in 2021. One of the things that's kind of unique there too, if you look down in that Bloomberg statistic, which I think is interesting, in China, exports climbed to 30.6% in exports, and then imports also jumped 38%. So there's a huge import-export that's going on with China because China's economy is, again, thriving once again. So across the globe, we're seeing just massive growth and expansion. We might have areas where they might be getting hit depending on COVID and those things for the moment, but really there's demand that's behind all of this growth. So let's talk about this. We see a lot of companies right now, they're saying, hey, we want to be a part of this, right? We have been working only in this country that I'm in, or maybe one or two countries, but we want to expand. We want to get into another country to kind of get in those economies and be a part of this growth that's happening. So they're formulating a strategy, and some of the strategies that you need to think about is, okay, what's your outcome? What do you want it to be? And that's important because depending on how you grow, you need to decide what type of footprint do you want, right? Are you going to have a large footprint or a small footprint? And what I mean by that is the number of employees. Maybe if you might need a warehouse or something like that, right? So that would be more of a larger footprint that you might need. But there are ways to set up entities and do those type of things where you have a smaller footprint or a test kind of um, in those countries to see if that's something you want to be long term. So the strategy is maybe you don't want to go wholly in with a wholly owned subsidiary or something like that in that country. You might want to set up a rep office, or you might want to, in this case, you might want to do like an employer of record in that country, because you might have some type of startup activities. And we'll get into that a little bit in some of the trends that are happening there. But understanding, okay, what are the company law compliance pieces you need to be aware of in that country? How challenging is it going to be for you? What about accounting and payroll? Does it require separate kind of books of the country that you're looking into? How difficult is payroll going to be? Do you have a partner that you can trust? Who are you going to use? Right? And then what are the compliance aspects in those countries as well? So you start to formulate not just, okay, that's where I want to be. That is fine. That's maybe the start. Then how difficult is it going to be to manage your entity or your employees or your activities in that country? So what we typically see is as companies decide what they're going to do, we see these type of hiring options. And I'll tell you, there's been an increase in trend on one of them, and I'll kind of speak to that. But the first one that we see in the top left corner is we see companies that expand globally. A lot of times they want to hire independent contractors. Okay, now this is where people say, hey, you're going to be a contractor for me, you're going to work for me, and I'm just going to wire you money. Well, that might work for like a short amount of time. And in coming from the United States, there's actually a term for this, a tax term. It's called a 1099 employee or contractors. It's a model that is used in the United States. However, that model is not very common internationally. A lot of companies think that, oh, I can just do this. And the answer is no, you can't. Not long-term for sure. And it can really get a company in trouble because no one's paid the social benefits and all of those type of things. Like in the US, there's a requirement to do those things. But internationally, it's just an unknown kind of way of they're really not an employee, but they are. And then there's all these type of issues with intellectual property issues and challenges. It can be really difficult. So we don't see that happen that much. We did a while back, a few years ago, a lot of companies were using independent contractors. Well, that model is not really viable. And so they've shifted. And what they've shifted to are direct hires. So they set up their own entity, right? They did, it could be a branch, it could be a rep office, it could be wholly owned subsidiary. They've got fixed term contracts, part-time basis, whatever that's going to be, but they truly are employees. Things are getting paid properly to the government, the taxes, all the employment laws are being employed. And that's a model that obviously companies do all the time, and it's been thriving. It's been going really, really well. One of the challenges there is with that, it can take time, especially right now in, kind of this COVID area that we're in. It can take time to set up your entity. If you've got visa requirements or you have other, work council requirements, it could be a challenge to get all those things set up properly. The one on the bottom, this professional employer organization, PEO, or employer record, okay? This has been a model that we've seen tremendous increase with. Companies are using this model, and really what it is organizations set up, use us for example. We have one of the largest employer of record services. We own our own entities across the globe. And what happens is companies will come to us and we will hire their employees on their behalf, okay? And that model has been working really well because everything is being done, payroll, employee contracts, all of those things are done legally. They're paid to the governments. The organization's set up properly to be able to do all those payments, to be able to handle those things. But what's nice about it, it's really fast for companies to go into a country. It's a great way to test out a market to see if they want to set up their own entity. It's kind of that first step that we're seeing. And we're seeing bigger and bigger organizations look for this model as they expand as well. I mean, this has been a big one in the United States. A lot of European companies want to go in the United States, but they get a little nervous, not because of necessarily HR laws, but the tax laws in the United States are very, very complicated when it comes to payroll. So they'll utilize an employer record service to help hire those employees on behalf of their company. And it's been a really good model, and it continues to expand and thrive. But those are options that companies have when they go. So some things about managing your employees, okay? things to keep in mind. So you need to understand that employment law and employment options are unique to each country. Okay? They change. Work time regulations, all those type of things change often. What type of termination protections, severance, all those things are real. And you need to be on top of those things. So we see a lot of companies challenged to stay on top of these, services around the HR around the world. Those are things you need to make sure that you're in line with. The other piece is benefits, right? We don't provide benefits. We help find benefits. We're not a broker or anything, but people need to understand that the benefits in a country, we kind of put them in three buckets, right? You have statutory benefits. These are the required benefits by the government. You're gonna get it no matter what, right? And then what we have is customary benefits. So customary benefits is, okay, this is statutory, but it's really common in this industry to have these benefits as well. And then on top of that, sometimes we'll see foreign companies want to hire the best talent, and they'll even offer supplemental benefits on top of that. So there's kind of those three buckets that we see across the globe that companies are utilizing. And then there's things that you've got to be aware of, like payroll. Okay, payroll you think is so easy. It can be challenging in some countries, right? It's totally different than where you're used to. There could be, a monthly payroll, but there's 14 payrolls in Latin America in some countries where you actually have to pay right before a vacation. You have to pay right before the end of the year, this extra payroll. So there's just uniquenesses that have to happen internationally in the payroll side of things. And it can be really challenging if you have a payroll provider that might be local that you don't even understand the language. You just hope that things are being done right. It can be a challenge. So making sure that you're handling those things well. How are you funding payroll? We're finding that bank accounts are being more and more difficult to set up internationally in certain countries. So, does your payroll provider have a way to do payroll funding to help fund those payrolls for you, even if you don't have a bank account in that country yet? Those are things to consider when you are managing your kind of global expansion. And then what type of hire to retire options do you have, right? How are you staffing your organization in that country? What type of HR, I want to say kind of staff that you have or expertise that you have that knows the knowledge of those countries or needs in those countries. And those are things all to consider. And then what type of systems do you have? Is your HCM system global? Or is it just really based for the country that you're in, and you're just putting in other employees' information? That might be a problem, especially with GDPR. There might be issues there. It might not be in the local language of that employee. So those are things to be aware of and to make sure that you have in place as you kind of manage this workforce. So what's kind of unique here is we've got a kind of an interesting thing happening. The workforce, because of COVID, has actually changed. The way people are working is different, right? Here I am sitting in my home office. I probably would have been out there in some type of meeting if we were, if it was kind of pre-COVID, right? We're all working from home. A lot of people are. Some people are going back to our offices at our company. In some states, we are going back to the office for certain days. But it's really changed. And this work remote and flexibility, it's not going away. Even if everything was settled again, it's not going away. And what we found is, according to Mercer, over 56% of organizations expanded flexible work policies in 2020. Okay, obviously, right? They had to. We all did. But what's interesting, in 2021, 34% continued to plan on top of that to have more flexible working environments for their employees. We've actually seen that the statistics are telling us that people are actually more productive. And according to Gartner, 55% of their workforce are higher performance when they're working with flexible hours. So this kind of work from anywhere concept, it's not going to change. That will be with us for a while. And because of that, hire from anywhere or talent anytime, anywhere is really big. Okay. It's funny, we meet with companies all the time. They're like, look, we're struggling. We want to find top talent. Maybe they used to say, we need to find them in the Bay Area, right? That's where our offices are. right there in the Bay Area, that's where we want them. Now they're saying, I don't really care where they're at. They might even be in a different country. They might be in a different state. Wherever the top talent is, we're finding that companies are willing now to hire them. Doesn't matter. Because of this flexible work environment that we're all used to now, it really has changed the way companies are hiring people and where they're hiring people. But because of that, there are still employee expectations, right? You still want to make sure that employee that you've hired has a good experience. The onboarding experience is good. There's knowledge in their given country of what's supposed to happen. Really awkward for an employee when they're hired and they might be thrown different kind of employee contracts or an offer letter at them that doesn't even make sense based on their country. So it's important that you have that kind of proper onboarding experience. And then how do you engage with them long term? What systems do you have in place that can help them engage? How often are you meeting with them? All of those different things are really important. And then like we talked a little bit about, just the payroll. There's payroll challenges globally with diverse workforce all over the place. Payrolls are run at multiple different times. It can be a challenge when it comes to managing your payroll internationally or globally. It's really a chance. So some other things to keep in mind, right? We talked about how you're going to hire people. We talked about how you're going to manage your people. What are those things that are important for them? Now let's talk about the compliance and complexities. So you've got that kind of the employee portion down. Well, now what about your company law compliance? There's all types of different compliance regulations that come down. How is your structure able to handle that? A little different if you're using an EOR. These things really don't fall under your preview because you're leveraging a company to do that. So your partner would actually be the one that's responsible for these things. But if you did set up your own entity or some type of registered office, you need to make sure you fall under company law compliance. Make sure that all the reports are done. Things like in Latin America, you might have to report your business taxes monthly and sometimes every 2 weeks. So are you nimble enough to be able to kind of handle that? You need additional support to make sure that those things are done right. And obviously accounting and finance is a big one. There's all types of laws that apply. Each country kind of has their own. Some countries actually require their own books in that country that need to be done and reported to. Those are all things to keep in mind. And then are you filing all the proper taxes, right? In some countries, I think some of the people on the phone probably know better than I. In Germany, it's like 14 different taxes, corporate taxes that need to be filed every year. So it can be challenging to know what they are, make sure that they're done properly. If you're not familiar with that country or that jurisdiction, it can be a real challenge for you. But not to say you shouldn't do it, because there's a huge advantage into going to these countries to take advantage of the booming economy that we've been talking about. Some pitfalls to avoid. These are some things that we see, so we're just trying to help you avoid those pitfalls. Think globally, right? So you have a global strategy, but you still need to execute locally, right? You still need to have that local feel to it. It's coming from kind of some of the payroll in my background. A lot of companies will think, oh, I'll just use this massive payroll engine in the world that knows everything. Well, no, there isn't a technology that knows everything payroll-wise, right? It still needs to be processed locally. So it's important that you know what's going on in that area, what's going on with those employees, what might be some challenges that they're faced with, what type of technology do they have locally. Those are all things that your employees need to have, okay? The other thing is we see a lot of times companies don't take in consideration like the culture of that country, okay? They don't understand the nuances. They just expect like, this is how it is, right? And this is how it's gonna be. Well, they don't understand, there's a different holiday schedule in Europe, as all of you know, than in the United States, right? You can't apply your US policy to other parts of the world or your European policy to other parts of the world. It doesn't make sense. So you have to understand those nuances. It's really important that you consider those when you're hiring or going global into those countries. Obviously, staying up to date is always a challenge with laws and regulations. make sure that you have a good partner that can keep you informed of those things so you don't find yourself in trouble or out of compliance all of a sudden. Again, kind of goes back to finding the right partners with payroll, HR, a lot of, setting up your entities properly, having that good conversation with someone that understands it and gets it. So you don't find yourself in some challenges. And then if you're looking at, we're seeing a big increase in this as well. So that's, I wanted to highlight it, is M&A. Private equity, M&A activity is really, really strong. We actually anticipate this to continue to be a strong piece in the next few years. And there is unique complexities to M&A today. Before, kind of COVID, companies would just say, okay, this is what we're doing. It's kind of all dollars and cents. Well, really, we're seeing that the right M&A partners are looking and saying, okay, what about on the HR side? What about the people? Okay, what laws and regulations are going to hit us or that we need to be aware of before we purchase this organization or spin off this organization? Those are things you do need to plan in advance. It's different because there could be some COVID regulations that apply. And so you need to make sure you handle those. What type of infrastructure do you have in place when you make that transition? All of those things are important. They're looked at very, very closely with other governments to make sure things are done properly. But also for the employee experience, it's important that you plan in advance, take a little bit more time on that M&A to make sure that you've got kind of the people side taken care of properly. Can you transfer employment contracts? Is there something in that employment contract that might cause you problems? How do you handle that or resolve that after the acquisition? All of those things you need to kind of think forward and plan. Sorry about that. Silence my phone. I thought it was silenced. Moving on. So those are some of the pitfalls that we see. So here's some areas, and we'll be wrapping up here in a minute, and I want to give us some time for Q&A. I'll look at the chat here and see if there's any questions. But here's some trending countries we see for expansion right now. And this kind of changes all the time, but we've seen, and I'll start with kind of the Americas, and I will say like Canada, we've seen expansion. Companies are expanding into Canada, Colombia, and kind of in South America. Brazil continues to be one of those places that companies are looking at, even though they've kind of been a hot spot lately with COVID. But we see there's a desire for that economy. In the US, right? The US, we didn't put it on there, but that's been a big one that companies are using, employer of record service to kind of take advantage of, the economy here in the United States at a very fast pace. And then in EMEA, we see for different reasons, the Czech Republic, Ireland, and Portugal, right? A lot of these areas are kind of becoming hotspots for talent, for employee talent. They want to hire people around the world. They find these to be good talent that they're finding. Might be a little bit less as far as, salaries and those type of things. That might be part of the reason, but we're seeing that to be one of those trend areas as well. In the Asia Pac, we see India continues to thrive, even though we've kind of seen a hot spot with COVID there. It's been continue to be a great expansion area for companies. The Philippines as well, and Thailand. We're seeing a lot of manufacturing kind of shifting. We see a lot of services being shifted around in Asia. And so those are continue to be really, really good areas for expansion. Okay, well, now that's kind of all I have for you today. I went maybe a little fast. Forgive me if I talk too fast, but let's go into Q&A.